I actually wanted to make part 2 of my project against idealism, but due to the exchange between Johann Ratz and Mortimer81, I noticed that it would be pointless to go on without first clearing up some fundamental misunderstandings. Not just on Ratz's part, but I noticed that other idealists make similar mistakes when responding to me or other materialists. In fact, I noticed that even people without supernatural beliefs tend to misunderstand materialism to some degree. So here I will present a quick series to explain some of the fundamental aspects of materialism. Keep in mind, however, that this series is in no way aimed at establishing materialism, but merely at explaining this view. So let me repeat that. This series is about explaining materialism, not about proving it. What pretty much anyone seems to understand is that in materialism, material is fundamental. All reality is material. But what most seem to not understand is that space is not fundamental if materialism is true. Materialism is a philosophical view on the ontological nature of reality that goes as far back as the pre-Socratic philosophers. The philosopher Parmenides could be considered as one of the fathers of materialism. Or perhaps you could call him a sort of proto-materialist. He was a strict monist, which means that he believed that reality could be reduced to a single essence, and that both time and space were ultimately illusory. Taken as a whole, reality does not actually change. Existence is a changeless mass of some sort of fundamental material. Like in any philosophical view, there are certain subsets. In other words, two materialists can disagree what it means for reality to be material. But let's focus on the nature of space. However, we cannot talk about space without talking about time. Parmenides did not believe in the passage of time. This is a view known as eternalism, the view that the sequence we call moments exists as a whole. The opposite view is called presentism, which is the quote-unquote regular view of time. That only a single moment in this sequence is real, called the present, and that there is an objective passage of moments. That reality as a whole goes through an objective passage of change. There were also materialists who held to presentism, so they believed that reality, even at the most fundamental level, went through changes. So rather than a changeless mass of material, reality was a dynamic mass of material. But if material was dynamic, it was moving around into something. This was known as the void, the infinite nothing in which material resided. So we have two opposing views within materialism: changeless material without void, and dynamic material within void. The view that physical reality consists of indivisible material is known as atomism. The word atom in this context has a different meaning than the word atom in scientific context. Obviously, that's where the term originally came from in science as well, but the atom in scientific models can be divided into even smaller particles, which in turn can be divided into even smaller particles. In other words, if the atoms of philosophical contexts are real, science has not yet discovered them. Keep in mind, however, that atomism is not synonymous with materialism, because one can, for example, believe that the atoms were created by a god or are a shadow of Platonic forms. Materialism means that the philosophical atoms are all of reality. But what does that mean about the nature of space? Let's consider the possibility that the fundamental material exists within space. Well, if that's the case, then by definition, space itself is either immaterial or non-existent. After all, if all material exists within empty space, then empty space is not included in the set of everything material. That's simply true by definition. But if that's the case, then there are two options. Space is nothing, or space is something. If space is nothing, then space doesn't exist. After all, being nothing means being non-existent. And in a sense, this is the concept of the void. But if space is something but not material, then that means that materialism is false, because the world would then consist of a material and an immaterial essence. In other words, a form of dualism. So either way, if materialism is true, then what we call space cannot be fundamental. Either it's a label for nothingness, or it is a label for some sort of aspect of the material, an expression of material, so to speak. However, is there any reason to believe in the concept of the void? Well, the concept of the void is logically inconsistent, and it has no basis in science. In fact, it's falsified by both general relativity and quantum physics, and there is literally no need to postulate a void in the first place. So one can be a materialist and completely reject the concept of a void. In fact, I would say that any materialist who postulates a void is being inconsistent. There is only a fundamental material. We ourselves and the objects around us are specific configurations of material. In fact, there is a huge scale between the objects we identify in common experience and smaller, yet relatively large configurations of material which we cannot even see with the naked eye. And you can go many orders of magnitude smaller than that. The distinctions between these physical configurations form sequences which we call space, which in our experience consists of 4 dimensions: length, width, depth and time. This of course does not entail that the dimensions of our experience are the only dimensions, and these 4 dimensions may very well be reduced to a lesser amount on a scale closer to the fundamental material essence of reality. And at that point, the concept of distinction itself breaks down. Because remember that our understanding of the world around us starts by just simply being alive and observing the world around us and putting labels on what we experience. The most basic concept of space derives from the ability to distinguish between specific configurations. What the ancient materialists who reject the concept of a void understood was that there is no emptiness between objects, but a continuum of objects. If you hold up your hands, you can distinguish between your left and your right hand, and you can make a distinction between your hands and the air between your hands. But air is not nothing, and the distinctions we make between objects is largely due to semantics, in other words, how we choose to label things. At the most fundamental level, reality would exist of a continuum of fundamental material with no emptiness to separate anything. So instead of saying that space is fundamental, we should say that space is inevitable. There are configurations, and therefore there is separation, there are shapes, there are sizes, there are distinctions. So if this view is correct, what would we expect of scientific models? Well, we should expect that space behaves as stuff. We should expect to find no actual emptiness anywhere. We should expect that space and time are ultimately not separate concepts at all. And we should expect that the closer scientific models get to the foundational scale of reality, space disappears as the configurations of particles disappear. We should expect space to be emergent rather than fundamental. So does material exist within space? No, configurations of material exist within space. Or maybe we should say, configuration causes space. Now perhaps we could meaningfully speak of a different type of space when it comes to material itself. A sort of actual space that refers to the philosophical atoms relative to each other, from which configuration emerges and thereby classical space. But that is not what the concept of space-time is about in scientific models. Actual space would be more akin to a sort of primordial network from which space-time emerges.